Good afternoon, good evening, good morning from wherever you are joining us. Buenas tardes, boa tarde. My name is Felipe Stefan. I'm an investment director at LUMINATE, a philanthropic organization. I'm also an executive producer of The Territory, a film that is premiered tonight and Sundance Film Festival. And this is the Sundance 2022 discussion on reimagining democracy through film. Before we begin, I want to share a couple of quick notes. The first is that for those of you wishing to use the English to Portuguese translation for this panel, there is a little globe at the bottom right portion of your screen where you can access your preferred language, as one of our panelists will be speaking in Portuguese. The other is that Sundance and LUMINATE are committed to making this event as accessible as possible. And as part of that, we will do a round of introductions that will include visual descriptions of those of us in the panel. I will kickstart that round of introductions now, and then we will formally open the panel and the discussion. That discussion will have me asking the panelists some questions initially, and then in the last 15 minutes of the conversation, we're gonna open it up for questions from those of you in the audience. So we very much welcome your questions with you, which you could add on the chat. Great, so to get us started, as I was saying, I'm Felipe Stefan. I'm a Latino man. I'm wearing glasses. I have brown hair. I'm wearing a black and red jacket with a black button-down shirt, and I am sitting in a room in front of a television screen and two paintings. And we have a fantastic panel with us for this conversation. I first want to introduce Snow Ningel Heng, who is the director of Midwives, film that is premiering on Monday. Snow, I'll allow you to introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Noni Eli. I am originally from Myanmar. I'm the director of Midwives. Now I'm sitting in my room in Berlin, sitting next to white windows, and I have black long hairs, and I'm wearing a green sweater. In front of me there is a very beautiful red roses, and behind me is a beautiful lawns.
Great, nice. Thank you so much, Snow. Let's move on to Bob Moore. Bob Moore is a producer in Midwives. He's part of I Still Films, which is also behind a number of films that would give us a lot to talk about in this panel, including Softy. Bob, we're delighted that you're with us. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Felipe. So happy to be here. So I'm Bob Moore from Montreal, Canada. I'm a white man wearing glasses with a beard and brown hair. I'm sitting in my apartment in Montreal with a plaid shirt on.
Great, thank you, Bob. I would now like to welcome Chai Surui, who is a Brazilian indigenous activist and an executive producer in The Territory. Bem-vinda, Chai.
Obrigada, Felipe. Oi, todo mundo. Eu sou a Chai Surui, sou ativista do povo Paité Surui, aqui do estado de Rondônia, da Amazônia brasileira. Como eu falei, sou uma mulher indígena, tenho cabelos pretos, estou usando brinco, colar tradicional do meu povo feito de algodão, tenho olhos negros e estou usando um cocá que é feito de penas e um cocá tradicional do meu povo. É um prazer estar aqui com todos vocês.
Muito obrigado, Chai. And finally, I'd like to welcome Jonas Sporer Rasmussen, who is the director of Flee. Welcome, Jonas.
Thank you. And yeah, I'm the director of Flee, which is an animated documentary that premiered at Sundance last year. And I'm in my basement in Copenhagen in Denmark. I'm Danish. I don't look very Danish because my mom is French and Russian. So I have dark curls. and I'm wearing a white button-down shirt and a black jacket. And behind me, you see a poster from my film and a white wall.
Great, thank you so much, Jonas. And to get us started for the conversation, I just wanted to share some very brief framing remarks. And as some of you may have seen in the description of this panel, part of what I wanted to share is that this panel is inspired by our understanding of the current state of democracy around the world. It is very clear that democracy is being threatened all around the world. We see here in the United States and elsewhere voting rights being curtailed. We're also witnessing terrible attacks on journalists, on filmmakers, and on activists. And we are also seeing threats to the very basic protections and human rights of the most vulnerable around the world. But part of the reason that democracy is also being threatened is because it faces a crisis of legitimacy. Democracy in far too many places has left far too many people behind. It is not producing the results that citizens around the world seek and that citizens around the world deserve. And as we think about the ways in which we can defend and reimagine democracy, we have to think about the role of film and cultural and narrative devices in helping us do that. Film is a key tool to help us understand ourselves and the world around us. It's been a key tool in surfacing injustices around the world and making them known. And it is also a key tool in giving us the images, the language, and the narratives to imagine the democracy that we really deserve, a democracy that is most inclusive and that works for all. And that is the topic of today's conversation. And we are going to talk to the panelists about not just these three films, but the impact that the films have had and the work that they're doing at that intersection of film and democracy and human rights. And to get the conversation started, I first wanted to start with you, Snow, and ask you about your film. Tell us a little bit about Midwives, which is, as I was saying, premiering on Monday. I had the chance to watch it, and it is an incredible film. And one of the things that you do so beautifully in Midwives is that you intertwine what is happening at a national level in Myanmar with images of tanks and the military and missiles with some very personal moments, very intimate moments of women giving birth and taking care of themselves and their babies and their families. And you do that in an incredibly powerful way that shows actually the linkages and the impact of the political on the personal. And so I want to ask you to tell us a little bit more about your film. Why did you want to tell this story, and why did you choose to tell it in this way?
My story is about two midwives, one Buddhist and one Muslim, working together in a Muslim village, western part of Myanmar in Rakhine State, where Rohingya conflict is happened. In 2012, Rohingya conflict was happened, and it was violence between Buddhist community and Rohingya Muslim in my country. So a million of Rohingya flee to Bangladesh, and there are 60,000 Rohingya Muslims living together with the Buddhist community. They have been forgotten. No one knows about them, like they are still living together. So that's what I want to find out the story, why they coexist together in the region. Also, I was born in Rakhine State, that region. So all these conflicts happen in my country, like a lot of hatred, what I hear from the media, also from everyone. It was really hard to believe because I was born there, and when I was little, like Muslim and Buddhist, they were friends. So to understand, it's also hard to live like without understanding what is going on in my state and in my country. So that's the reason I went back to Rakhine State and searching for the story. So as a woman, so to capture this very big conflict issue, I'm always thinking that it would be great for me, like to contact with women characters. Also, like people in my state, they were always talking about, okay, Rohingya population is so much bigger every day because they don't use like, they don't use any birth control. That's the reason like they give a lot of babies. So for that point, I was thinking, oh, maybe midwife would be great story to start for this like for my film. So so that was kind of like my idea, like inside that is kind of like script in my mind that I'm going to find two midwives. They should be one Buddhist and one Muslim living together in the same village, because I don't know them when I started thinking about this story. But then I contacted my relative, my auntie, who also living in that region. So I shared about my dreams, and then we were searching for that two midwives, and gratefully and wonderfully, I found like very extraordinary two women working together in the same village, like my imagination character. That's how I started for this story.
And Snow, what are you hoping that people around the world learn about Myanmar watching your film?
Okay. When I started this story, is my main mostly concerned about women in the conflict region, how they able to live in that region, how they able to live their life in that in a conflict area. But then like after I follow two of my characters, also my country has very complex politics situation. Also, like civil war is happened since 60 years, like stay happening in a different region. But then, like after 4 years, after 5 years, I made this film. Now we have military coup in Myanmar. So people in Myanmar have very tragic time. So we are living with like uncertain situation, and like we have been living with this horrible time. Yeah, so that's what I want to talk about, because in international media, like they don't really show about my country situation, but people in Myanmar are still fighting for democracy and to get our freedom. Yes, even we are living under this military regime at the moment.
Thank you, Snow. And Bob, you worked with Snow in this film, and you've also done a number of films in very sensitive and complex environments. And it's clear from watching Midwives that it is a story that took very significant amount of care to be able to tell it, and very significant amount of courage from Snow and many of those who are featured in the film. Tell us a little bit about what you consider to be crucial, what needs to be in place to be able to tell the kinds of stories that require this level of care and courage.
Thank you, Felipe. I mean, it's a difficult question, honestly. There's sort of a chicken and egg thing about finding a really special film and story. I would only say that it kind of begins and ends with the filmmaker, in this case with Snow. We have a production company like many others. We don't really chase like subject matter, and so it's somewhat by happenstance. In this case, my partner Mila Thwin is Burmese, so there's an obvious link. He was teaching at the film school in Yangon. Snow was teaching there. That's how they met. But we would not have done a film about Myanmar. We did a film because Snow was doing this film, and that sort of everything flows from there, and then you kind of figure it out as you go along. I wouldn't say that we have a formula or a way of safeguarding even the process. Each film is so wildly different that the circumstances present themselves, and we really we took our lead from Snow and continue to in handling the situation and in being able to tell the story in an authentic and sensitive way.
Thank you, Bob. And I now want to ask Chai a similar question, because you have worked and you're an executive producer on The Territory. It premieres tonight at 8 p.m. So if you haven't gotten your tickets yet, please do so on the festival page. But Chai, when we were preparing for this panel, one of the things that we were discussing is that after your plenary speech at the COP26 conference, which was an incredible speech that generated incredibly significant reactions, including from the president of Brazil and many other leaders around the world, you came to the realization that the world did not know enough about what was happening with your community in Brazil. What are you hoping that the world knows about what is going on with your community, and what do you hope that they take away after watching the territory?
Obrigada, Felipe, mais uma vez. Exatamente, como um filme, gente. Eu tô sabendo. E mais do que trabalhar no filme, o filme conta, na verdade, a história das nossas vidas, da minha vida também. Porque o filme ele vai contar a história da minha mãe e vai contar a história do povo do qual eu cresci junto. Porque eu sou do povo Paitesseruí, mas a minha mãe trabalha, né, há muitos anos com o povo Uruá, o povo de Paú. Então, vai contar a história dos povos indígenas do Brasil. E é exatamente isso, né, que eu espero que as pessoas entendam e vejam quando verem o filme. Entenderem que aquilo está contando a história do que vem acontecendo com os povos indígenas no Brasil. E qual é que é a importância disso? Quando eu fui para a COP e percebi que ninguém realmente sabe o que está acontecendo aqui no Brasil com os povos indígenas, as invasões, os ataques, a destruição da nossa floresta, e eu vou dizer para vocês que em outras partes do Brasil, muitas pessoas também não sabem o que está acontecendo. E por isso a importância do filme, de poder mostrar para todo mundo a luta que nós estamos travando, não só pelos nossos direitos e não só pelas nossas vidas, mas pelo planeta inteiro. O que a gente está, né, o mundo inteiro já percebeu a importância da Amazônia para o mundo, a importância da floresta para o mundo. Porque sem floresta, sem Amazônia, a gente não tem vida. É essencial falar isso. E eu vejo o filme muito importante por isso, porque, de certa forma, ele leva essa mensagem para o mundo inteiro, de que nós precisamos todos, né, apoiar a luta dos povos indígenas. Uma luta que a gente vem travando com as nossas vidas. Literalmente, quando vocês verem o filme, vocês vão ver que mais do que contar a história, a gente está falando, né, da nossa luta e das nossas vidas. E que essa luta não é só nossa, que a gente está lutando pela vida de todo mundo. E é esse tipo de impacto que a gente quer levar. A gente quer ecoar cada vez mais as nossas vozes para todos os lugares. Enfim, eu falo muito, gente, mas porque se você vê no próprio cinema, você não vê as pessoas contando a história dos povos indígenas. E eu acho que há pouco tempo isso vem acontecendo, né, com outros filmes. E o Território traz isso de forma linda e brilhante. E é como se é mais do que um filme. É uma denúncia. A gente está denunciando para o mundo inteiro o que está acontecendo aqui.
Thank you so much, Chai. You were saying that this is about your fight, that you are making a claim that this is more than a film, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts about how we go from telling the story that the film tells to action, to activism, to making sure that reform that is sustainable can be achieved. How do we go from the film to the action?
Primeiro, as pessoas têm que saber o que está acontecendo, né? Porque é isso, eu sei que muitas pessoas sabem que aqui no Brasil, né, na floresta, a gente vem passando por muitas coisas. Que a gente está tendo uma democracia enfraquecida, que a gente está tendo os nossos direitos sendo colocados, né, em xeque, mas as pessoas de fato não sabem o que está acontecendo. E a gente vem mostrar isso. O filme fala um pouco também sobre a própria colonização, porque quando o colonizador veio aqui para o Brasil, ele veio, invadiu nossas terras, né? Coloca nossas vidas em risco, nos mata mesmo. E invade nossos territórios e destrói eles. E a gente está mostrando que é isso que acontece até hoje. Até hoje a gente tem nossos territórios invadidos, nossas vidas ameaçadas e nossos direitos tirados de nós. Então, o primeiro passo é que as pessoas saibam o que está acontecendo para que elas possam, né, fazer alguma coisa. Então, além de só mostrar, a gente quer fazer que esse filme mude a cabeça das pessoas também, né? De que elas entendam exatamente isso. Nossa, olha o que está acontecendo na Amazônia. E a Amazônia é essencial para o clima que, né, que cada um deve estar passando aí, né? E todos os países já estão sofrendo com a questão das mudanças climáticas. Claro que aqui os países mais pobres vão sofrer mais, mas isso é importante para todo mundo. Para que daí, sabendo o que está acontecendo, né, a gente possa apoiar os povos indígenas em migração e a gente possa, dos nossos próprios lugares, fazer alguma coisa.
Muito obrigado, Chai. I think there's a few things that are emerging already from the panel that are worth highlighting. I think one is the importance of awareness and building awareness as a key component of being able to build collective action and people power to then push for reforms. As you're hearing from some of the panelists thus far, part of the issue with some of the topics that are discussed in their films is that there is no actual widespread awareness of the types of stories that the films are telling. I think that the other thing that is so powerful of what we're hearing about midwives and the territory thus far is both the urgency of the stories that these films are telling. Snow and Bob were telling you about the current situation in Myanmar, which is unfolding now and is incredibly urgent. And Chai is speaking incredibly compellingly about the impact of what is going on in the Amazon for all of us and for the future of our world and for climate justice. But also, to Chai's point, how interconnected really those stories are. It is true that the stories that we're seeing on screen may not necessarily reflect our own personal journeys, but nonetheless, there is something in those stories that connects to us and to our future and to the world that we're building for future generations. And that is why these stories are so important. And I now want to bring in Jonas to talk about Flea. I was telling Jonas before the panel started that Flea was my absolute favorite film in Sundance last year. And I am glad that so many around the world have been able to see it and that it has received such incredible critical acclaim. I think that one of the reasons that Flea resonated so much with me is because as someone who is gay and who is an immigrant myself, I realized that the story that the film was telling was incredibly different to my own personal story, far more challenging than my own personal story, but that there were elements of that story that connected to my life and to injustices and struggles that I've seen LGBT plus people and migrants and refugees around the world face. But one of the things that stayed with me when I was watching Flea is that it is an animated documentary, which in and of itself is incredibly interesting. But I realized I actually had not seen the face of the person that the documentary introduces us to. We actually don't know the name of that person, the real name of that person, and that's partly to protect, of course, that person's story and identity. And I thought it was fascinating that I was able to connect so much with the story of a person I actually hadn't seen and didn't know their real name. And I wanted to ask you about that, Jonas, because that was a interesting choice that you made on how to tell that story. And I want to hear from you, why did you tell that story in that way? And what were you able to do by telling the story in that way that you wouldn't have been able to do otherwise?
I think there's a couple of different answers to that question. First of all, Amin, who's the subject of the film, hadn't told his story before, and it's really hard for him to talk about these things that he went through in his childhood and his adolescence. So what you see in the film, what you hear in the film, is the very first time he talks about these things, and it's not, it's not easy for him to talk about. So the fact that he could be anonymous behind the animation was really what enabled him to kind of start, okay, but I'm going to be able to share this if I don't have to be in the public eye with these things. But also, because it's a story that takes place in the past, so it was really about how could we make Afghanistan in the 80s come back to life, and his childhood home in Afghanistan come back to life. And also, it's really a story about memory and trauma. And with the animation, it really enabled us to be a lot more expressive about these things. So whenever he started to talk about things, it's really hard for him to talk about his traumas. His voice kind of changes, and I thought, okay, but we need to see this individual style of the film as well. So the visual style, the animation becomes a lot more expressive and surreal to kind of support these emotions, because all of a sudden it wasn't about what things looked like. It was really about an emotion he had inside. And with the animation, we could really show that. So when he was talking about something that was traumatic, or where he felt afraid or angry, we kind of had this other kind of animation that supported that. But I think, also to me, I had the experience when I saw Wolves with Bashir more than 10 years ago now, which is also an animated documentary that deals with trauma. And because we're exposed to so many stories all the time, in the media, of people who go through really, really harrowing things. Speaking for myself, I tend to block things out, because if I take everything in, I'm not gonna get out of bed in the morning. I'll just kind of, it'll just knock me out. So I block out a lot of things. But I think because it's animation, that was my experience with watching Wolves with Bashir, at least. I kind of, because I don't have to relate to a real human face, I kind of don't block it out at the beginning, and I start to listen more, and I take it in because it's another medium. And maybe it's also because, you grow up with animation being this kind of kids medium. So I think somehow there's like a clear path to your heart somehow, because it's something you kind of grew up with, and also, the story becomes more universal because it's not one specific character, it's a drawing, and it kind of applies to a lot of other people as well. And maybe that's why you, Felipe, also got, attached to it, because it's not just one person. Yes, of course, behind the animation there's one person, but because it's animation, it also becomes more universal.
Thank you, Jonas. And I'm curious to hear about the impact that the film has had, that being able to tell that story about that boy that has to leave Afghanistan and then finds refuge in Europe and eventually comes out as gay. What has been the impact of being able to tell that story and to have so many in the world welcome and celebrate that story?
I think, first of all, the people who I've met and talked to, around the world, it was really about how people could all of a sudden relate to a story of a person that they wouldn't normally identify with. So really and I think that's really a key here. Also, just echoing what's been said already, this thing about creating awareness, but also creating relatability, because it's really hard to attack people or not think about people if you can relate to them. If all of a sudden you have a refugee at your door, but you can relate to a refugee story, then it's more difficult to kind of not take notion of it. So I think it's really about creating relatability and making sure that people see the nuance in this, and also just to kind of give a human face to the refugee story, because we have a refugee crisis, but I think we kind of wrongly call it a refugee crisis, because already there you kind of dehumanizes them. You call them something else. It's really a humanitarian crisis, and it should be treated as such. And so I really hope that people can just see the human face and give some, and with the film, that will give some nuance to the refugee story, so people can see how alike we are.
Thank you so much, Jonas. Chai, I wanted to ask you a little bit about not just the stories that are told, but who gets to tell the stories. Because one of the things that has become very apparent is that the stories that are really most powerful are the stories in which those who live them get to really tell their own experiences. And in the territory, you and many other members of the communities that the story features are producers in the film and help shape the way that the story was told. And I was hoping that you would tell us a little bit more about the importance of democratizing and making more representative what happens behind the cameras.
Então, eu acho que o diferencial do território é exatamente isso, né? Que além de democratizar as histórias para que todos saibam, a gente também democratiza esses espaços de criação e de produção, que são tão importantes. Né? Porque não adianta só a gente levar as histórias, mas que nós estejamos levando a história que queremos, através dos nossos olhos, através da nossa visão de mundo, através de quem está vivendo. Porque senão fica sempre sendo outras pessoas contando as nossas histórias. E quando nós, povos indígenas, vamos contá-las então? A partir daquilo que sentimos, a partir daquilo que vivemos. E é isso que a gente quer fazer também, né? Fazer não só a produção mais democrática, mas o próprio cinema mais democrático. É como eu falei antes, né? Por muito tempo a gente não via filmes sobre indígenas. E além de falar sobre nós e sobre nossas histórias, nós estamos contando elas. Né? Nós estamos contando a nossa própria história. E isso é muito importante. Isso é muito importante para nos empoderar mesmo. Né? Porque aqui a gente tem uma dificuldade muito grande. Hoje a gente usa, por exemplo, o celular como uma arma de denúncia mesmo. As mídias sociais como uma forma de denunciar o que está acontecendo aqui com a gente. E a gente está fazendo isso agora também através das câmeras e através do cinema, que muitas vezes eram espaços que pareciam muito longe da nossa realidade. Então, isso é extremamente importante, não só para a nossa construção, como de estar não só alcançando esses lugares, né, mas estando empoderados desses lugares. Porque isso também é poder. A gente poder contar nossas próprias histórias é um empoderamento que foi tirado da gente há muito tempo. E que agora a gente retorna e pega de volta. Para poder contar para o mundo inteiro o que a gente está, a nossa luta. Através das nossas próprias mãos. Através da forma como nós queremos contar a nossa história. E que outros, não só os povos indígenas, mas que outros possam fazer isso também.
Obrigado, Chai. I think you're speaking to the idea of empowerment. Oh, sorry, I had that. I was listening to Chai in Portuguese. Chai, you're speaking about empowerment and individual and community empowerment not coming just from being featured in a story, but from the power of being able to tell your story. And I think that there is something incredibly important about stories of us, by us, for us. And that being a central component of being able to raise the awareness necessary to start enabling collective action to seek reforms and changes in the way that society operates and that democracy operates. And I'm grateful that you would raise that point about the importance of empowering communities to tell their own stories. And on that point, I wanted to go to you, Snow, on what you've done to tell your story and the stories that you see in your country. What is the impact that you hope comes from people being able to see midwives starting on Monday. And what is the Myanmar that you hope for, that you hope to see, that you hope that can be built for future generations?
Okay, so I just want to talk about, my country's situation at the moment, because my country doesn't have a democracy. And also the last 5 years, we have a kind of fake democracy. So for me as a filmmaker, it has never been easy to make documentary films in my country. So like, for journalists and artists have been detained for reporting conflict, Rakhine conflict, about Rakhine conflict, and they have been detained. So it was always risks for us, like to make our own documentary and our own story. So maybe you might know that like most of documentary came out from Myanmar. It was made by foreign filmmakers, not Burmese filmmaker, because like living under like military regime, we have no right to carry our camera, and making documentary is always risks. And whenever we go out with camera, we can get arrested, and we can get anything happen to our material, also our life. So for future generation, I'm really hope that we have freedom of media and freedom of speech. Also like a filmmaker, like freedom to make our own documentary. That's what I really hope for, because without documentary, we can make our own history, and we can make our own voices. So documentary is important for my country, but we have only like very handful amount of filmmaker, because we are scared to make film. So that is kind of like, we got controlled by military. So like if we have like fear, if we don't have like any kind of like freedom, so the country will be always like, we will be always left behind. As you all know that Myanmar, like international people, they know about Myanmar like last 5 years. Now things are coming back to last 50 years, like nobody know about Myanmar. So Myanmar has been cut off to international. It has been so long. There was no internet. So like people like young generation people nowadays, they got the internet because of 5 years of our democracy time. So we can connect with people. As now we can connect. I can connect working with Bob and my filmmakers from other countries. That is kind of like because we have resources, internet. So now country is tragedy again, and we don't know when they will cut off our internet. So if we get cut off internet, we will be silenced, and nobody know about what is happening in my country. That was what I worry about, so like and also me as a filmmaker, making this documentary is about, for me, when I started this documentary, is about Rohingya community and women in that region. But now my story is not only about Rohingya conflict, because when Rohingya conflict was happened, the whole country, like people in a different region, also we don't really talk about that, because Rohingya people, they have injustice in humankind, and it was happened, and we don't really aware of that. So because of not doing any taking action, like we don't really support to Rohingya people, now we are into the same situation like Rohingya, right? Because military has been killing a lot of people, also like arresting so many people, as you can see in my films. So that is really tragedy, because now the whole countries, we know the whole country now, we really know about, we have been so much fake news, and all these like military, they have been brainwashed for so long. Now people in Myanmar, we understand about what is reality, and we are really united at the moment. We are really united for because of this dark situation. So we've been fighting to get a freedom and a democracy, even though we don't know what will happen, but the whole country is really united. So because of that, we are really hoping for positive change in my country. Like this revolution will be win for sure, but it will take time. But we really believe that we will win for this journey, this revolution.
Thank you, Snow. And we are also hoping for a safer, more inclusive, more democratic future for Myanmar. One of the most powerful scenes in your film is when two of the midwives are speaking about the fighting that is going on, and they say, this is not a fight between the people, this is a fight between two armies. And I found that moment so powerful in the film because it spoke to the need for people to continue to live their lives and look out for themselves and for their families, and the ability for people to make connections, even if they come from different backgrounds, in this case, different religious backgrounds, regardless of what is happening around them. And I just thought that that was very powerful, and that it signaled and it gave me hope that the connections that people in those communities around Myanmar have been able to build will be able to serve as the foundation for a better future for the country.
Yeah,
And,
I'm also
yeah.
very much
Go ahead.
hoping to show my films in my country. But of course, in the moment, I cannot show my films because of this military coup. And now, because I really hope that I will go back to my country and to present this documentary, and then they will understand more about Rohingya situation, what is really going on, and they will be really related for this story, and I'm pretty sure they will be support.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the idea of you not being able to show this film in the place where the story comes from is so painful, and I wish and hope for the day that you are able to show your film in your own country. And I think it speaks to a point that I wanted to ask you, Bob, about before I pass on to questions from the audience, about the importance of international solidarity, about being able to stand by courageous people around the world who are in the front lines of fighting for democracy and basic rights in their countries. You, of course, have been a partner to Snow in the journey of telling the story featured in Midwives, but you've also done that, for example, with Softy, which tells an incredibly powerful story from a activist in Kenya. You've done it also in Cambodia and other places. And I was hoping that you could speak to the importance of folks outside of these countries coming in to support, provide financing and guidance to people who want to tell their stories and haven't had the chance to do so.
Thanks, Felipe. I mean, first, I feel like I have to acknowledge the significance of what Snow just said and what Shai just said. What we're listening to are significant statements that have global impact, and I hope that the audience is aware of the situation for both of these filmmakers and activists. And it's, to be honest, being an ally in a situation like this is terrifying in some ways. We've spent a lot of time talking about security protocols, and you do that on all the films, things come up. I mean, I just briefly, before I actually answer your question, it reminds me of the premiere of Softy at Sundance. And it's a fairly political film, and there's violence perpetrated against people who speak out in Kenya. That's as a fact, it's ongoing. And the Kenyan ambassador to the United States showed up at the premiere of the film, and we were like, oh, and it just happened, and she's a close personal friend of Uhuru Kenyatta, and but she was a fan. She became a fan and a champion of the film. She understood the truth that was being shared. She understood the revelation about her country, and she literally championed. She tried to advocate that should be Kenya's submission to the Academy Awards for foreign films. So alliances can come from unlikely places. And I would say that speaking to the other established filmmakers in the community and that are part of this call, that that certainly I have found it supremely gratifying or amazing to discover filmmakers with an authentic voice that simply need access to resource and prior knowledge. And that is, you know, a relative, not simple, but is a very doable thing. And so when we're able to work and trust a filmmaker like Snow to take, not just to be a repository of knowledge about her country, but to be an actual artist and to make decisions creatively in every aspect, the music, the, you know, color grading, the like every aspect of the edit, to just constantly circle back with humility to empower the person who's actually telling the story. The results are shocking and wonderful, and that's why I'm very proud for this film in particular. But that's where I see the role of alliances internationally, and just empowering genuine artists and filmmakers, not extracting, you know, from them.
Thank you, Bob. We're going to move on to the Q&A portion, and we have a couple of questions already in the chat. If you have any questions for the panelists, I'd encourage you to put them into the Q&A chat, which is in a button at the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to get to the most of them that we can. I see some questions in the chat. We have a question from Carolina Jimenez, who is the president of WOLA and an incredible activist in Latin America. And Carolina was raising a point that Chai had made about the importance of telling these types of stories, because we need to change people's mindsets. And Carolina, you were saying, I think in civil society, we agree with her completely. Sadly, when we look at the list of the most viewed films, we rarely find these important films in those lists. What could we do to ensure greater outreach to reach audiences that are key for the social and political changes that we would like to see as the result of these films? And so, Chai, since this question mentions you, I was hoping to come to you first, but we'll open it up to any of the panelists who wanna answer this question about what can we do so that these important stories reach more people. And perhaps as we begin answering that question, I would like to say, first of all, that it is great to see how much there's been a greater interest in documentary, long-form documentary, and how much Sundance has provided a platform, increasingly so, to documentaries from around the world that wouldn't have a platform otherwise. And of course, there's more than we can do to democratize and make distribution and access more accessible, but I think things are trending in the right direction. Nonetheless, there's important efforts to be done to keep moving in that direction and get it there. So, Chai, let me come to you. As you think about the territory, what can we do to make sure that the most people possible watch the film?
Então, vou falar do nosso filme, né? O que a gente pensou para que isso acontecesse, porque realmente, né, não basta só a gente fazer a história, filmar a história e fazer o filme sem que as pessoas não consigam ver esse filme. Então, a gente passa por um outro passo importantíssimo do filme também, do que é a campanha de impacto, né? Então, trabalhando a nossa campanha de impacto, o que a gente pensou e pensou como para ser prioridade mesmo para a gente. Que, por exemplo, que esse filme seja levado e visto nos territórios indígenas. Não só para o povo Rueuauau, mas em outros territórios indígenas que também passam por isso. Além disso, que a gente leve para outros lugares aqui do Brasil, né, para todas as partes que não sejam só a Amazônia e para outros movimentos que também estão sofrendo com o enfraquecimento da democracia no Brasil, como o próprio movimento negro, né, como o movimento sem terra, como, né, outras comunidades que também, assim como os povos indígenas, vivem na floresta. Então, o nosso objetivo é que na nossa campanha de impacto a gente leve para todos os públicos, né? Não só para esses territórios que muitas vezes, por exemplo, tem aldeia e tem, né, por exemplo, jovens indígenas que nunca foram no cinema, que nunca tiveram a oportunidade de ver esses filmes que estão no cinema. Imagine os filmes que estão nos grandes festivais. Então, que a gente possa levar para essas pessoas o nosso filme e que elas vejam, né? Além disso, que a gente leve também para as outras pessoas, né? Para aquelas pessoas que são aquelas que têm o poder na mão, vamos dizer assim, né? Que são elas que tomam as decisões. Que a gente coloque essas pessoas para ver também. Porque, como eu falei, né, nas minhas outras falas, mais do que contar a nossa história, a gente quer realmente fazer que esse filme seja algo transformador. Transformador de mentes e transformador de realidades, né? Que as pessoas, ao assistirem o nosso filme, queiram sair dali prontas para ação, né? Prontas para conseguir realmente transformar e mudar o mundo e fazer dele um lugar melhor. Assim como os outros filmes que eu tenho certeza que também tem esse poder que a gente está conversando aqui. Então, né, no nosso filme, a gente pensou nisso. A importância da nossa campanha de impacto para levar para essas comunidades que nunca tiveram essa oportunidade de ver filmes que estão nos grandes festivais, para essas pessoas que estão na tomada de decisão, né, dos nossos países, do nosso planeta, do nosso mundo, e conseguir colocar em todos os lugares para que as pessoas consigam ver o nosso filme. Porque eu acho que isso é muito importante mesmo, né? Que todo mundo consiga ver. Então, eu acho que passa por aí. E que eu acho que é muito importante falar disso, que é para a gente também pensar que democratizar o cinema é isso, que a gente consiga democratizar os nossos filmes e levar eles para outros lugares, que, né, locais como o Sundance, como outros festivais, sejam cada vez mais acessíveis a todos. Obrigada.
Thank you, Chai. I think that in the panel we said we were going to discuss how we were going to reimagine democracy through film. I think part of what we've been also discussing is that to do that, we also have to talk about how we democratize film from production all the way to distribution and impact campaigning. And I know, Jonas, for example, for people who want to request a screening of Flea, they can go on the website and request a community screening. Are there other things that you have done as part of the impact campaign of the film and of making sure that we don't wait for audiences to find the film and come to the film, but that we can also bring the film to audiences?
Yeah, but definitely, like we're doing, Participant is doing a lot of work in the US and North America to with our impact campaign and getting it to an audience out there. And here in Denmark, you know, we do, I've done tours, you know, at high schools, because I think it's so important to really reach the young audiences, because that's really where you can make a big change. So really go to all the young people who are still kind of finding their way in life and are open to see the world in new perspectives. I think it's really important to kind of reach those people. So really trying to get out to the young crowd and we also do, you know, collaborations with the UNHCR and the Danish Refugee Council to kind of do screenings for people who have similar experiences. So they kind of see, okay, but we're actually able to share our stories, and there's actually people who want to hear our stories. I think the act of just, you know, listening to other people's stories and sharing stories is really what is important here, because that's really what makes us come together and see how alike we are. So I think just, you know, listen and share is kind of really some keywords for me. And it was also, you know, in the making of Flea, I was the ears in Flea to just listening to Amin's story. And then now hopefully a lot of other people will, through my ears, be able to hear his story and be able to relate to his situation.
Thank you, Jonas. And I'm reminded of some other films that have done incredible work on impact campaigns, including many films on Participant. I know I Still Film has also done a lot of great things on impact campaigning side, with a couple of films in Mexico that we funded through the Sundance LUMINATE Fund, a cop movie, and La Vocera. There's been community screenings all throughout Mexico, even bringing kind of inflatable screens where you can project, and being able to democratize the access to these films is a really important thing. I think I have time for one last question from the audience. So I'm going to combine the two questions that I see at the top of the chat. One which is from Ambassador John Feely, who's asking about being able to access the financing necessary to realize the vision for these films. And another one from the incredible Brenda Coughlin at Sundance, who is asking about what is needed in terms of safety and security. So let's talk about money and tools necessary to make these films. And I'm keenly aware that of the importance of asking this question because I have the privilege of working for a philanthropic funder organization. But Bob, let me start with you on that question. What does it take to find the money and the resources necessary, the tools necessary to be able to do these films and to do them well and safely?
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you. I mean, you know, we each one is sort of scratching and clawing your way through. I'm sure the other panelists would agree. It's not obvious. I would say that Snow's film highlights a particular and interesting issue in the field of films that could be considered from some angle activist or, you know, impact oriented, which is that she was really focused on the art of and the personal story element, and therefore we had to turn down or sort of steer away from some potential like television style funding. So pairing up with the type of partners who are not looking for a really specific result, but will empower the filmmaker to do the thing they're trying to do. And I think to the previous question, I wanted to vote for the art form element of it. You know, a Flea is a wonderful example of a film that really, like, an impact campaign would be kind of meaningless if it wasn't, you know, such an incredible film that you can basically take that thing and go out with it. And so structuring from the beginning, it's a wild mishmash of people, some wonderful individuals that financed Midwives, PBS POV, which is a stalwart, incredible supporter. You know, there are some anchors out there, but to find the people that will make the film, that will enable you to make the great version of the film and not the version that just fits certain things, that's the path for us, definitely.
Is no anything that you want to say on either of these questions? Let me come to you.
Oh, okay. Actually, when I started this documentary, like, you know, so many people want me to make about what is like kind of new story in that region. But being as a storyteller filmmaker, I wanted to make this film through from my film languages, the way I understand emotionally, also using my film language. That's what I want to tell the story. So having you know, producer like Bob, and they always support me that the story that I want to transfer to their audience, not about, you know, like a, you know, war story, like a journalist type. It's, I don't want to make that kind of story. So like I'm using the story that what I really want to tell with film languages. Yes, I think that's the answer, right?
And just to say, I think on the territory, since Chai and I worked on that film together, and I was one of the funders for that film, that we experimented, to Bob's point, on the way that we could structure that support. And I think one of the things that we have found fascinating is that, of course, when stories are told by the people who are featured in those stories, and they're part of the team and part of the production team, when a film has a sale, those people and the organizations that they represent can also benefit financially from that film. And I think that there's a responsibility for philanthropic funders to create flexible ways of funding production and also impact distribution in a manner that potential commercial benefits from a sale can actually go back really to the communities and the people that are most proximate to the issues that are featured in the films. And I also think that there's a responsibility for funders around the world, both people who are equity investors in films and as well as philanthropic funders, to fund with considerations for duty of care and provide more than money, provide support, guidance, best practices, tools for digital security, tools for physical security, to make sure that the people who are putting their lives on the line to tell these stories have what they need to be able to tell them and to tell them well, and to be able to show them to the people who need to see them. And so as the funder in the panel, I just want to make a request of my fellow funders to really think about ways in which they can support documentaries from around the world, regardless of language, to think about flexible ways in which they can structure that financing, and to do it with a consideration for what is required besides money, so that people can really tell these stories. And with that, we are coming to time. I really want to thank the panelists for joining us, and all of you for giving us our time to discuss this very important conversation. I see that there's some questions both in the chat and the Q&A about where can I watch these films, and also will this panel be recorded, and would the recording be available? And the answer to all of that is yes, the recording will be available. You'll be able to find it in the Sundance Film Festival page, and we will make sure that those of you who are interested in that recording can access it and share it with others who may not have been able to join us. And for Flea, the link is in the chat. If you want to bring this film to somewhere where it needs to be seen and it hasn't been seen, Jonas and his team would be happy to make that happen, and you can request a community screening. The Territory and Midwives haven't premiered yet, so there's no community screenings quite yet, but as I mentioned, the Territory premieres tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern. Midwives premieres on Monday. They both have more screenings later in the week, and you can access tickets for those screenings in the festival page at Sundance after they've premiered and they start getting out there in the world. I know this is true for the Territory, and I imagine will be true also for Midwives. They will have impact campaigns to make sure that we can get these stories to the people that want to see them and need to see them, and we will make sure to keep you posted on those. And you can also keep abreast to the news about those films by following everyone in this panel and their films on social media and on the pages that were included in the chat. And with that being said, let me close by saying that when I started this panel, I spoke to the threats that democracy faces around the world. And one of the threats that I was describing had to do with a crisis of legitimacy. People feeling like democracy wasn't actually producing the results that it needed to produce. That crisis of legitimacy will only get worse if it also links up with a crisis of hope. We need hope, but not empty hope. We need hope that centers on an understanding and a true awareness of the stories and the issues that are impacting the lives of everyday people around the world. And we need stories that will give us the tools and the images and the language to take those stories and not only learn about them, but join the movements and the collective action necessary to push for reform. At the end of the day, it is with people power and with engaging people in understanding the issues that impact not just themselves, but others around the world, that we will be able to push for a reimagining of a democracy that does work for all, a democracy that includes racial justice and climate justice and access to land and access to rights for the most vulnerable, access to rights for migrants and refugees, to the LGBT plus community, in which people's future and the future of their countries is not determined solely by military coups and takeovers and populist authoritarians that are trying to erode democracy from within, by the actual will of the people who know what is best and who have the right to determine the future of their lives and the future of their communities. And I hope that with that, I've inspired you to continue thinking about the intersection of film and democracy around the world. And I again want to thank very much the panelists for sharing their thoughts, their insights, and their stories. Thank you all. Muchas gracias. Muito obrigado.
Obrigado.
Thank you.
Thank you, Felipe.
Thank you.
Felipe, you were great. Really appreciated that, man. As long as we're still on here, I don't think anyone else can hear us anymore.
Thank you all.
Hopefully.
Maybe someone can hear us, but I appreciate that. Whether they can hear us or not. You were all fantastic.
It doesn't matter.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Wonderful to meet you guys too.
Vocês foram maravilhosos mesmo. Prazer conhecê-los.
Prazer, Chay. Muito obrigado. And congratulations again on the premieres of the films. Very much looking forward to seeing them come out into the world. And Jonas, good luck with the Academy Awards. We're keeping our fingers crossed for you.
Yeah.
Hit the trifecta.
That's
Yeah.
exciting.
Thank you all. Have a good afternoon.
Yeah, have a good one.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Tá, gente.
And thank you
Obrigada.
everyone at Sundance. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Obrigada, tradutora. Prazer, você foi ótimo.
Thank you, Chai. Thank you, Monica.